Story 1. It was a foggy night in the Poconos Mountains as I set out to make a late-night pizza delivery. I had been working as a delivery driver for Tony's Pizzeria for a few months now to help pay my way through community college. The owner, Tony, didn't care much about rules, so I often found myself out on the road late at night, delivering pies to distant rural houses nestled in the hills. I never minded the long, lonely drives through the mountains. There was something peaceful about it. Just me, the road, the towering dark forests, and occasional glimpses of moonlight peeking through the mist. And the tips were always better late at night. But this night felt different somehow. An ominous energy hung in the air as I wound my way down the foggy backroads. I had just one delivery to make to a house 15 miles out of town. As I drove along my usual shortcut, I noticed the woods seemed closer, the trees looming taller over the narrow road. Strange shadows danced around me in the low-lying fog pockets that drifted across the asphalt. I shuddered, suddenly feeling very isolated and alone out here. Just then, my headlights flashed over a dark figure darting out from the tree line up ahead. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. There was a sickening thud as the front of my car collided with the figure. My heart dropped into my stomach. I had hit someone. Hands shaking, I slowly got out of the car, dreading what I would find. In the beam of my headlights lay a man, face down on the road, motionless. He was wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie, the hood pulled up over his head. It was impossible to make out any identifying features in the darkness. Oh my God, I whimpered, kneeling down next to him. Sir, are you all right? Can you hear me? No response. I reached a trembling hand towards him, then pulled back, afraid of what I would find under that hood. Should I try to help him? Call 911? Flee the scene? My thoughts raced as I agonized over what to do next. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the still night air. I jumped, startled by the desperate, terrified sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere deep in the forest surrounding the road. Another cry for help split the silence, making my blood run cold. Someone was in trouble out there. I looked back down at the lifeless man by my front tires. As much as I knew I should stay, I couldn't ignore those screams. Whoever it was sounded like they were in dire need of help. Making a quick decision, I sprinted into the woods, following the echoes of the screams. "Hello!" I shouted desperately into the night. "Where are you? I'm here to help." No more screams came. There was only silence now, except for the haunting sounds of creatures stirring in the woods. The fog drifted eerily around me as I stumbled through the brush, disoriented. Suddenly, I heard a stick snap sharply behind me. Whirling around, I thought I spotted a figure ducking behind a tree, barely visible through the mist. My pulse quickened. "Who's there?" I called out shakily. I didn't want any trouble. I just want to help. Only the whisper of wind through bare branches answered me. I stood frozen for a moment, peering into the darkness. Had I imagined it? No. Someone was out there. I was sure of it. And I had a terrible feeling they were not seeking help. I backtracked hurriedly towards the road, dry leaves and twigs crunching beneath my feet. The woods pressed in oppressively around me as I tried to recall which direction I had come from. Panic rising in my chest. I pushed through the branches, desperate to get out of there. At last I stumbled back to the road, breathless with fear. To my shock, the man I had hit was gone. Only a dark stain on the pavement marked where his body had been. I leaped into my car, locked the doors, and sped off down the road, eager to put as much distance as I could between me and those nightmare woods. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I replayed the strange events in my mind. What had happened back there? Where had that injured man gone? And who had been lurking in the trees? None of it made any sense. Somehow, I managed to deliver the pizza to the correct address in the next town over. I was functioning on autopilot, still shaken by my experience. After handing over the pizza to a kindly older man, I headed back to my car, ready to return home and put this night behind me. As I fumbled for my keys, a woman's voice called out, "Do you delivery drivers usually work in pairs?" I looked up, confused by her question. "What do you mean?" She gestured towards my car. "I just noticed you had someone riding along with you tonight." A feeling of dread crept over me. Slowly, I turned and looked through the rear window of my car. There in the back seat sat a dark figure, face obscured by a hood. I cried out in shock and horror, stumbling backwards. The woman clutched her chest, equally startled by my outburst. I babbled out an explanation about calling the police as she hurried inside her house to phone for help. Within minutes, red and blue lights were flashing down the street as 2 police cruisers pulled up. The officers quickly searched my car, but found no one inside. However, they did retrieve one chilling piece of evidence: a large hunting knife stained with blood. It had been hidden under the back seat, close to where the hooded figure had been sitting. I could barely speak, only able to haltingly recount my traumatic tale as the police took my statement. They searched the surrounding area, but could find no trace of the mysterious, vanishing man. In the end, they assumed I had been the target of some ultimate evil coming my way. The delivery location, the screams, the hooded man, it had all been an elaborate setup. If not for that observant neighbor, things could have ended very badly for me. I quit my delivery job the next day. I was too shaken up to ever get back in that car or return to those fog-shrouded mountain roads. The police tried to investigate, but the lack of evidence gave them little to go on. To this day, I still have nightmares about that twisted night. I feel sure I was meant to be the next victim of whoever, or whatever, was hiding in those woods. I'm just thankful that one last delivery saved my life, but the hooded man has never fully left my thoughts, his faceless presence still haunting my memories of that evening. Story 2. It was a cool October evening as I prepared to close up the small pizza shop I had been working at for the past few years. I was a college student trying to pay my way through school, and the late night shifts at Antonio's Pizza allowed me the flexibility I needed with my class schedule. I didn't necessarily enjoy working there. The pay wasn't great, and the work could be boring and repetitive. But it paid the bills, and Antonio was a laid-back boss who didn't micromanage, so I couldn't complain too much. This particular Friday had dragged on. It was close to 10 p.m., and I hadn't had a customer for the last hour. I had already cleaned up most of the prep area and dining room, and was ready to close up shop and head home. Just as I was getting ready to lock the register, the phone rang. I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to deal with a late order when I was so close to being done. But responsibility won out, and I answered the phone with the familiar greeting. "Antonio's Pizza, this is Ivan speaking. How can I help you this evening?" Silence greeted me on the other end. I thought maybe they had been disconnected. "Hello," I tried again. "Are you there?" More silence. I sighed, about to hang up, when I heard it. A faint whisper of a voice, so quiet I could barely make out the words. "Pizza. I'd like a pizza." The voice belonged to an elderly woman, her quiet rasp sounding especially eerie in the empty shop. I hesitated, feeling unsettled, but tried to maintain a polite tone. "Of course, ma'am, I can help you with that. Did you want to place an order for delivery?" "Yes, delivery. A small pizza." She proceeded to slowly rattle off her address, 1413 Oak Street, Unit. I jotted it down, still feeling unnerved by this spectral-like voice on the other end of the line. "All right, ma'am, I have your order for one small pizza to be delivered to 1413 Oak Street, Unit. It should be about 30 minutes. The line went silent again before I heard a soft thank you, and the click of the phone hanging up. I shivered, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Something about the call just felt eerie. But an order was an order, and I wanted to do a good job, even if it meant having to stay later than I had hoped. I let out a sigh and went to the back to let Antonio know about the order. Antonio raised an eyebrow when I told him about the strange call, but merely shrugged and told me to go ahead and take care of it. I watched impatiently as he quickly whipped up one of his signature thin-crust pies. My fingers tapped restlessly on the counter as the minutes ticked by. I just wanted this bizarre delivery over with so I could get home. Finally, Antonio handed me the steaming pizza, reminding me to bring him the receipt for the cash out. I bundled up quickly, grabbed the pizza, and headed out the door. Punching the address into my GPS, I noted with annoyance that it was clear on the other side of town, a good 15 minutes away. So much for getting home early. I drove through the dark, silent streets, following the turn-by-turn directions. As I got closer to the address, the houses became more run down, bars and boards covering many of the windows. I began to feel apprehensive. What kind of place was I delivering this pizza to? At last I pulled up to a small, ramshackle bungalow on a street lined with similar abandoned-looking homes. The only light came from a flickering street lamp across the road. The whole scene looked like something out of a low-budget horror movie. I hesitated, then chided myself for being ridiculous. It was just a pizza delivery after all. Grabbing the pizza box, I headed up the pitted sidewalk to the front door. I rang the bell and waited, but no one came. The house remained silent and dark. I peered through a gap in the curtains, but couldn't see any movement inside. Figuring the woman may not have heard the doorbell, I knocked loudly, still nothing. I was just about to give up when my eyes were drawn to a darkened window on the side of the house. Was that movement? I cautiously made my way down the side path, my heartbeat quickening. As I drew closer, I could see the outline of a figure peering out of the window. My breath caught in my throat. Illuminated in a shaft of light from the street lamp stood an impossibly ancient-looking woman. Her face was a mass of wrinkles, her hair thin and straggly, but her eyes seemed to glow with an unnatural brightness as they bored into me. She continued to stare, unmoving, as I stood frozen in place. I don't know how long we remained there, trapped in that twisted gaze. Finally, I was shaken back to awareness, cleared my throat awkwardly. I have your pizza here. Small pizza for delivery." No response. She continued to stare through the glass with that same intensity. I raised my voice, calling out again that I had brought her pizza. She remained motionless for a few more breaths. Then slowly a smile spread across her face. But there was nothing warm or friendly in that smile. It was twisted, malignant almost. My heart pounded as every instinct told me to get away from there. I dropped the pizza on her doorstep and hurried back to my car, skin crawling as if I could feel her eyes following me. I jumped in and tore off down the street, not even bothering to look back. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I focused on getting as far away from that house as possible. Once I had driven a few blocks, I pulled over to catch my breath and calm my racing pulse. I sent a quick text to Antonio, letting him know about the bizarre delivery and that I wouldn't be returning to the shop. What a way to end my shift. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping soundly after this creepy encounter. Just as I was about to set my phone down, something in the rearview mirror caught my eye. There, reflected in the glass, was the old woman, standing right outside my car door. Her gnarled hands rested on the window as she peered in with milky eyes. My scream caught in my throat. I slammed the car into gear and hit the gas, leaving her staring after me as I sped off into the night. I drove home in a terrified daze, constantly checking all my mirrors. I kept imagining I saw her shape darting through the shadows, but each time I looked, nothing was there. Finally, I got back to my apartment, double-locked the door and collapsed on my bed. But sleep refused to come. I tossed and turned, thoughts of the woman plaguing me. Those glowing eyes, that smile. I knew I would see them in my nightmares. I quit my job at Antonio's the next day. I could barely recount the story to him without my hands shaking. He shrugged off my fear, saying I must have imagined things after a long night. But I knew what I saw, and I never wanted to see it again. I avoided that neighborhood after dark from then on. Once in a while over the years I'd be drawn back during the day, circling past that decaying little house, half hoping to catch a glimpse of that phantom-like woman again. But the house remained empty, void of any signs of life or inhabitants. Still, sometimes on solitary nights I'll wake in a cold sweat, echoes of that encounter drifting through my memory. I can't explain exactly what I saw that evening. A ghost, a demon, some ancient creature that only took human form under the veil of darkness. I may never really know. But one thing I am certain of: true evil walked the earth that night, and it delivered a pizza. Story 3. It was a typical Friday night shift delivering pizzas for Pizza Palace back in my high school days. I had just started working there a few months prior to earn some extra cash. It was an easy enough gig. Pile into my trusty 1999 Toyota Camry, pop the delivery address into the GPS, and cruise around town dropping off piping hot pies to hungry families and college kids. Plus, I got to listen to my own music and have some time alone with my thoughts, which as an angsty teenager was pretty nice. This particular night, I was scheduled till close, which meant I'd be taking the late night deliveries out to the more rural areas surrounding town. I didn't mind the long country drives, especially once the sun had set and the roads were dark and peaceful. Sure, the tips weren't always great, but I enjoyed looking at the stars and taking in the fresh night air. At around 7 p.m., I got an order for a small pepperoni pizza to be delivered out past the state forest about 15 miles outside of town. It was an area I wasn't super familiar with, lots of winding roads and densely wooded land. But the GPS would get me there no problem. I hopped in my car, carefully set the pizza in the passenger seat, and headed off towards the remote address. After about 15 minutes of driving, the paved roads turned to gravel, then finally dirt. I was surrounded on all sides by thick, untamed forest. My GPS informed me I was drawing near my destination, a solitary house situated right in the midst of the wilderness. I turned down an overgrown driveway and spotted the house, an old-fashioned single-story cottage made of wood that looked like it had been built at least a century ago. It had a certain eerie charm to it, but the isolated location gave me the creeps. The unkempt lawn had become a field of tall grass and weeds, and the whole place had the air of being long abandoned. Was I even at the right address? Lacking any better options, I decided to deliver the pizza. I slogged through the knee-high grass up to the front door, noticing there wasn't even a proper door, just a rickety screen. No doorbell either. I raised my hand to knock loudly when suddenly I froze. I had the distinct feeling of being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up as I scanned the surrounding woods. Was someone out there? Just then, I noticed the peephole on the door. Someone was inside the cabin, peering out at me. I cleared my throat awkwardly. Pizza delivery for... I checked the receipt. A Mr. Neary. Heavy footsteps sounded from within, approaching the door. They stopped just on the other side of the entrance. I stood there expectantly, waiting for someone to open up. A gruff, unfriendly voice called out, "Bring it around back." I hesitated. Something felt off about this whole situation. "Are you sure, sir? I can just hand it to you here." Silence. But I could tell the man was still standing on the other side of the door, watching me through the peephole. A chill went down my spine. Maybe I should just leave the pizza on the step and get out of there. But I really needed this job, and I didn't want to upset my boss by coming back with an undelivered pizza. Mustering my courage, I slowly headed around the side of the house, pushing through the chest-high weeds. As I reached the backyard, I immediately spotted a shed and a small patio area with a table and chairs. And in one of those chairs sat an unmoving figure facing away from me. I hesitated again, then called out, "Pizza delivery for Mr. Neary." The figure didn't respond. I started creeping slowly towards the patio when suddenly I heard from behind me, "Over here." I whirled around to see a wild-eyed, disheveled-looking man peering out from behind the corner of the house. He had a twisted, unsettling grin as he beckoned me over. "Come here, I want to show you something." That was it. Alarm bells going off in my head. I turned and sprinted back around the house towards my car. I jumped in, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of there like a bat out of hell. I drove a few miles down the winding dirt road before finally pulling over to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking as I called the police to report the creepy encounter. The responding officer informed me no one had lived in that cabin for years. He investigated the property but found no signs of recent human habitation. I quit my delivery job shortly after, badly rattled by the experience. I still wonder about that figure on the patio, and what deranged plan the man hiding around the corner had for me. Every time I drive by that area now, my skin crawls thinking about the cabin in the woods.